Hello, welcome to Scrap Time. My name is Christine, and this video is part of the Inky Background series, and we're going to be talking about a Gesso Resist. Now, gesso is sort of a paint primer that you can get, and what I've done ahead of time is I put gesso through stencils. This particular stencil is from the Crafters Workshop, and it is called Wild Blooms. So you put your gesso through your stencil, and then you let it dry. And then you apply your mediums, and this works best with water-based mediums. So here I used watercolor paints, and you can see that the paint sticks to the background, but it stains the gesso a little, but it comes off, and the flowers really pop off. And I'm going to be showing that in a demo in a moment. So this one here is Micro Hearts. From the Crafters Workshop, and in this case I sprayed Distress spray stains on it. So I got a really cool background with the reds and the pinks, but then I was able to wipe the spray stain off the gesso, and again it stains it a little, but those hearts pop up. So this one here is Sea Bubbles, and this time I used Distress ink. And Distress ink doesn't like to stick to the gesso, but again, it sort of stains it. And then the pattern of the stencil pops up, and the color is in the background. So this is really great. You can put this on first, and it's just a way that you can get more texture in that into your lower levels, background levels on a project. So this one I want to show you, I used Dina's Distress crayons. And I did this earlier today, and although it rubs off a little, I'm going to just spritz my paper towel because I only rubbed it off a bit. Just to show you that her crayons really do work over top of gessos and that. So I am getting some off it with some water, but for the most part, it's really sticking to that gesso. So you can still use it to form an interesting texture, because here I'm really rubbing and I am getting some off, but just with my finger it's not going to come off. So you can use it to the gesso in the background. This was the Dylusions mermaid scales, or fishtail she calls it, and there's a lot of gesso. Only the lines around don't have gesso. All the fishtails are gessoed. So you can use Dina Wakley scribble sticks on it, and it would really stick to that gesso, but still create a cool pattern on your background. And this one here is the Distress crayons. And when I showed you the second Distress crayon video of how it did stick, it did work over top of the gesso and how you're able to smudge it and that. Again, I wanted to show you where now we have gesso as a pattern, and I think you should be able to see the pattern in the background. But again, it's a cool way to form a really interesting textured background is by putting the gesso through a stencil and then your crayon over top. And especially if you have a lot of gesso, then you can really smudge it in and use your paintbrush and wash it in and get a really cool background. But I'm going to show you the resist. So I have this page. Can you see? There's like a pattern on that. And I know people are like, oh, you use white. Well, gesso's white. And for the oomph, you need to use white gesso. So I'm sorry if you can't really see it, but there's a reason why one uses white gesso. So I'm going to get my brush, and I'm using watercolor paints here, and I'll use some greens. Don't use a lot of green. I'm not a green. But you can see just by brushing it on how the gesso is resisting that watercolor paint. And the paint's only going to go into the paper where there isn't any gesso. So I'm just going over it to make sure that the paint gets covered in there. Now, earlier I showed you how to do the water staining. You can always do the water staining technique for this. You can do a whole thing with distress inks, how we did before. It doesn't have to be just the straight on applying. You can do any of those techniques we did before and then over top of the gesso, and you just get that more and more texture and then more interesting things. So the more you layer your techniques, the more interesting of a background you might get out of it. So I'm going to dry this. So it's fairly dry. Now if I just with my finger go to rub it off, it's not going to come off. But if you want that resist to show, I'm just going to put some water down there. I can take my paper towel and you can see with a bit of water, you have to keep changing because you see how much ink I have on that. So you want to keep moving your paper towel, getting a fresh area to wipe off. You can see how that paint just wipes right off the gesso. So this would be the case for the majority of water-based mediums. Gesso is a non-porous medium, and so your inks won't sink in like they do with the paper. The inks just sit on top of the paint. And that's why you get this resist. Now, in doing this, I'm also taking off some of the color in the background. You can always go back in with another layer of your medium and add more color and then take it off the gesso again, and it would become a little darker. So you can see how that design now pops off, but the background is still the green. And I did it with watercolor paint, but then you can go in and add a different medium over top that. You can add some inks. You can mix up all your different mediums and see what you come up with. So that is the gesso background through a stencil. And so again, we have, we got some pink, but that just adds to it. Anyway, we have the crayons. We have the scribble sticks, distress inks, stains, and again, the watercolor paint. Thanks for watching. Be sure to give our video a thumbs up and subscribe to Scrap Time videos on YouTube. And for more inky backgrounds, be sure to check out the Inky Background playlist.